Time for another Sportsnaut.com interview. Hi, I'm Scott Gulbransen. I'm joined today by the great investigative reporter over at USA Today. That is Kenny Jacoby. Kenny, we're here to talk to you today about the Mel Tucker investigation at Michigan State. Just, shocking things happening there. But for our viewers who aren't quite familiar with the details of the story, give us a little bit, unpack the timeline a little bit. What happened with Mel Tucker? What happened with Brenda Tracy here, and that led from your investigation into these allegations at Michigan State?
Yeah, so Brenda Tracy in December 2022 filed a complaint against Mel Tucker with the university's Title IX office, saying that he had made sexual comments and masturbated on the phone with her in April 2022 without her consent. They had first met in August 2021. When he hired her to speak to his players and give her speech about her gang rape and about victim blaming and sexual violence prevention. And after that, they had developed a sort of a professional bond where Mel Tucker invited her back to campus 2 more times, named her honorary captain at a spring football game, and generally they developed a sort of a friendship. So that's the context in which the incident occurred. Then, of course, 8.5 months pass before it all comes out, and hours later the school suspends him. The backstory on that is Brenda had contacted us a few months ago, basically alerting us to what was going on. She said she wanted to try and make it through the case without it going public, but realized that given the high profile nature of it and frankly MSU's history, there was no guarantee that that was going to happen. And so we were really her backup plan, and we started hearing rumors, that the story was getting out and that her name was attached to those rumors. And that is essentially what prompted us to publish the story late Saturday night.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about the history, obviously, with Michigan State. For those that don't know, it's pretty horrific based on the Larry Nassar situation. But when you look at this, and Mel Tucker, of course, as late as early this week, denied all of these and has doubled down on that denial. And so when people looking at the outside and looking through the great pieces that you've done at USA Today, and others have now jumped on board, a lot of people start looking at this, Kenny, as a kind of he said, she said. Of course, there's the recording, which is very graphic. Of course, you mentioned earlier what Mel Tucker's accused and we hear him doing on the phone. When you look at this and people start to look and say, well, it's a he said, she said, what has your investigation kind of led you guys to so far in the allegation here and the seriousness of it?
Yeah, I think I've covered a lot of these sorts of sexual harassment and sexual assault cases, and often the inherent nature of these sorts of things is that there are no eyewitnesses to the incident. There are really often no recordings, and there's no recording of this phone call. But so in that sense, yes, it is sort of a he said, she said. But that's how these cases are, and schools are tasked with sorting out the facts in these situations. The preponderance of evidence is the standard that they use, and that really just means whose side is more believable than the other. And so the things that they will suss out at this hearing that's scheduled for October are essentially whose account is more credible here. And the investigator found some pretty key inconsistencies in Tucker's account that could come back to hurt him later. And in the statement that Mel Tucker issued just a couple days ago, he also seemed to contradict statements that he had previously made to the investigator. And so those sorts of things where his story is changing and doesn't really add up, those are the sorts of things that could ding his credibility in the hearing.
Yeah, and Kenny, I know these issues, I mean, they're so sensitive. And like you said, you cover them. And for all of us, I have a daughter. I've been through that, college, all the stuff going on. And so you always want, when somebody makes an allegation, you have to take it seriously and you have to do due diligence, investigate it. We're not in a society anymore where people can, try to get away with that stuff. That said, too, there also clearly is going to be stories to the other side of the issue. And so far, it's been a little bit more in passing, but we've seen some discrepancies with the length of phone calls and some of that. What are we seeing on the other side of that issue that Mel Tucker is alleging, or that show inconsistencies with the story either way?
Yeah, so Mel Tucker has maintained, from the first time he talked to the investigator, that he and Brenda Tracy had a romantic connection that they talked about openly. He said they had a flirtatious relationship, but they had agreed that nothing could essentially come of it. And he said that this developed over 8 months, had culminated in them having consensual phone sex. So that's his side of the story. Where the investigator came in and found some potential holes in his story are there are a few different things. One of the first things is that Mel Tucker had told the investigator in his initial interview that he was at home in Lansing when the call occurred. He said he had just returned home from a trip to Florida that he said was not work-related. He said he was doing charity work unrelated to his work with the school. Well, the investigator had obtained documents from the school showing that that wasn't true, that he was in Florida, in Naples, Florida, attending a golf charity tournament when the call occurred, and that trip, in fact, was a university-sponsored work trip. He had submitted an expense report to the school seeking reimbursement for his hotel and meal costs, and he had flown there on a private plane. And even the expense report itself says that the trip's purpose was administrative, that it wasn't personal. So that was one of the key things. Another key thing was that Mel Tucker had canceled Brenda Tracy's third planned visit to the school, which was supposed to take place in July 2022. And that was a few months after the phone call, and that was going to be the first time that they had seen each other or spoken since the incident. Well, he canceled that trip 3 days before, and he told the investigator that he did so because he had this coach who was a newer coach and who was supposed to implement a new mental conditioning training on short notice. Well, the investigator looked into that as well and found that essentially Tucker had said he had given the time to this new coach, and that's why he had to cancel Brenda. Well, the investigator found that that coach did not meet with the team that day, that he had already been meeting with the team for this, 6 weeks or so prior to that. And so it wasn't like this last minute thing where he had to yield the time over to another person. So those are just the sorts of things that didn't quite add up about his account.
Yeah, interesting. And of course, Mel Tucker got a 10-year contract, $80 million on the line there for him if he were to lose his job, especially over allegations, if they were proven true as part of this investigation, he would lose all that. So I have a feeling that either way it goes, this is going to be stuck in the courts for a while. But this takes us back to Kenny, to the Michigan State issue. Larry Nassar, of course, decades long scandal there of covering up allegations of sexual misconduct, which we all obviously knew what happened with that case. So Michigan State is in a tough position here too, and they have to do this. Now they're being criticized, and you talked about it in some of your coverage, right? That it was 8 months before anybody knew about this, and per your point about Miss Tracy, her saying she didn't really want it to go public unless she had to. But in this case, it looks bad for the university. It looks like they were covering it up again, even though they keep saying that. What have you found? Do you think that was purposeful, or has your investigation shown that? Or do you think this is just a weird situation and it comes on the heels of obviously what was a difficult time for the university?
Yeah, I think it's a completely valid criticism for people to have of the school that they took so long and seemed to only, take definitive action after the news came out. That just has the stench of them trying to cover it up. And, for a school where there is so much distrust on that campus because of the Larry Nassar scandal, that just doesn't sit well with a lot of people. And that's not a satisfying, way for them to deal with it. Michigan State says that essentially it had built some firewalls between the Title IX office and the administration and the board, so that the Title IX office could conduct this investigation really independently without, the potential for a high-level administrator to weigh in and try to put their finger on the scale or intimidate or tamper with the investigation anyway. So that was really a safeguard that they put in place. Now, some people have argued that, well, maybe they should have taken action after the investigation report was delivered in July, as opposed to waiting until the hearing ends, which is not going to be until October. And I think that's a valid point as well. But Michigan State is saying that they continued to keep the process independent and intentionally tried to keep details away from the athletic director and the president, just to avoid any potential risk. So it is really a tough decision. It's a tough position for the school to be in, and I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer or not. But you can see why people are upset about this.
Sure. And let me ask you this sort of in closing, which is, like you said, you've covered this numerous times and covered this issue for USA Today. You look at this, I don't know what the university can do other than investigate and then come out. It doesn't seem like anybody's going to be happy no matter way. Now, of course, you could say justice wins. If somebody was harassed, clearly you want that person to be protected, especially somebody like Ms. Taylor, who was a rape victim in her past and goes around trying to prevent this from now on. If you look at this compared to other cases, is this running the same course, or because it's Michigan State and because of the Nassar background that you just gave, does this make it kind of like all bets are off on what might happen here?
Yeah, I think, if their goal was to keep the case confidential and to protect Brenda Tracy's privacy, they did a pretty good job of it for almost 9 months. And, we were all thinking, if this gets to the hearing, like, people are going to find out about this eventually. So it was almost like a ticking time bomb in a sense. But as far as the hearing itself, I could see, if it does get to a hearing, I could see it going a couple of ways. One would be they find Tucker, at fault for violating school rules, and that will probably lead to his firing. Or they may find, I think this is within the realm of possibility, that there's just insufficient evidence to say one way or another if he did. And that would put MSU in a tricky spot too, because they wouldn't have this finding of fault on the record that they could use to fire him for cause. But they would still, have to decide, do we want to chart our future with this man who is, accused of sexually harassing one of the nation's most prominent sexual violence experts, running our football program? And I think the answer is probably no. And, there's so much money at stake here, $80 million, like you said, that the tension and the fear is that the university will somehow make a decision that isn't about the facts of the case, but that is more politicized and more financially driven. And, the unfortunate thing is we really never know one way or another whether the decision happened that way or not. And so it could be a very dissatisfying ending, whatever it is.
Yeah, just a tough situation. And, you never want to see anything like this happen in any workplace, let alone a university. And, of course, then you toss in the college football angle of it. Of course, there's cases like this every day all over the country that nobody hears about because they happen to regular people, too. This happens to bring it into the spotlight. And thank you for your investigative journalism, which we obviously need more of around the world. So we appreciate it, Kenny. You can follow Kenny, by the way, on X Twitter at Kenny Jacoby. Kenny, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.